The wind that swept across the Bay of Crabs was heavy with the scent of salt and rotting seaweed, tinged with the faintest hint of coming winter. Gulls wheeled overhead, screeching their hunger to a world on the cusp of war. From the ramparts of Seaguard, Robb Stark watched the morning unfold, the gray light slanting over the harbor where ships with the dire wolf banner rode at anchor. His jaw was set, and his hands, strong and rough for all his 19 years, were clenched white upon the stone. Beneath him, the quays were alive with industry. Blacksmiths hammered out links of anchor chain and lengths of spiked caltrop to scatter across the sea lanes. Fisherfolk and sailors, pressed into the service of House Stark by the edicts of their new king, labored beneath the stern gaze of Sir Brynden Tully, the Blackfish. Oarsmen loaded crates of hardtack and salted meat, and barrels of fresh water into the hulls of longships. Greyjoy vessels, now captained by Northmen and Riverlords, since Balon's ill-fated rebellion had seen his ironborn fleet shattered and his banner broken. Robb let his eyes linger on the masts and lines, the painted prows bearing wolf and trout, and the ancient sigil of House Manderley, brought from White Harbor by Lord Wyman's son. Beyond these, the horizon was empty, the pale blue sea unbroken, but for a single lonely fishing coracle. It was a far cry from the southern ports, Lannisport, Old Town, even King's Landing. But it was his fleet and his hope. He felt his mother's eyes upon him before he heard her step. Catelyn Stark's presence was as steady as the stone beneath his feet, and as cold when she needed to be. Her hair, long and auburn, was pulled back, and her gown was simple, gray and blue. She took his arm, drawing him into the shade of a broken arch. "You do not eat," she said quietly. "You do not sleep." Robb shook his head, gazing at the bustle below. "Nor do they, mother. Not while the Lannisters hold my sisters captive and ravage the Riverlands. Not while they bleed the realm and boast of their strength. I must break their power, and every path leads to death and ruin." She laid her hand atop his. "You have won every battle, yet you are no closer to Sansa or Arya. The Lannisters are not broken. They are richer than all the rest. Gold buys steel, gold buys grain. The city will not starve with the Reach behind them. Not while the Red Wine fleet holds the sea. Now," Robb's eyes flared, "that is why we must command the sea, mother. If we cannot take Lannisport, we can still choke them in their own golden cage. The Lannisters hoard, but gold cannot be eaten. If we close every harbor, every cove, if we cut off their lines to the Reach and seize their ships, King's Landing and Casterly Rock will feel the jaws of the North close about their throat. Then shall..." Catelyn's gaze sharpened, and for a moment Robb saw the Tully in her, the fish whose very life depended on the rivers and the tides. "It is a gamble, Robb. The North is not made for ships, and the Lannisters are cunning." "The Manderleys are made for ships," Robb answered, hope kindling despite himself. "White Harbor builds war galleys that could make old Torrin proud. Lord Wyman has promised me every vessel he can spare, and House Blackwood, House Mallister, the Riverlords remember their oaths. Even the remaining Greyjoys, who bent the knee, hunger for revenge upon the lions who burnt their coasts. Damn." He let out a breath, long and heavy. "If I can bottle up Lannisport and Fair Isle, block the Mander at Maidenpool and Harrenhal, send raiders to harry the supply lines from the Reach, then the city will grow hungry. Gold will not fill empty bellies." She studied his face, searching for weakness, but there was none. Only the hard resolve of the North. She nodded once and let her hand fall. "You are your father's son," she said. "Be wary, my son. You wage war as much with hope as with steel." A bell tolled from the docks, low and mournful. The sound of a fleet readying for war. Robb turned, summoning Grey Wind to his side. The dire wolf padded close, golden eyes fixed upon the massing longships, his fur bristling at the sense of tar and blood and salt. The war had entered a new phase. The wolves were going to sea. The fleet assembled under the banners of House Stark, House Tully, and House Manderley was a patchwork fin. 20 stout war galleys from White Harbor. Smaller longships taken from the Ironborn and now rowed by Northmen and riverlords. Fishing cogs hastily fitted with balustae and spiked rails. At the head of it sailed the Sea Wolf, its prow carved in the likeness of a snarling wolf, eyes set with river pearls. Upon the quarterdeck stood Lord Wyman's son, Sir Wellis Manderley, broad and cheerful even in the teeth of war. Aboard the Sea Wolf, Robb met with his captains, Wylis and Sir Brendan Tully, Lord Jason Mallister of Seaguard, Lord Blackwood and the aged Sir Hoster Rivers. Maps sprawled across the table, ink-stained and pocked with counters. Red for Lannister, blue for the north, green for the Reach. "We strike at Lannisport first," Robb declared. "The Rock feeds upon the wealth of its city, and the western lords grow fat on the trade from Old Town and the Arbor. If we can blockade the harbor, even for a fortnight, their pride will suffer. The Redwyne fleet is harrying Stannis at Dragonstone and the Stepstones. We must move before they turn west." "Nah." Wellis grinned, his hand heavy upon the map. "The deep-water channels here and here. Our galleys can slip past the Fair Isle patrols at night. My father's men have sailed these waters since the first Manderley fled south from the Reach. We will close the net." Sir Brendan's eyes were sharp. "And when the Lannisters answer? When they send fire ships or the Lions of Fair Isle? We cannot match them ship for ship." Robb's voice was iron. "We are not Ironborn, nor are we fools. Our blockade will be loose. Raiders, not a fleet of the line. Let them think us harrying pirates. We will strike supply ships and grain barges, burn what we cannot take, and slip away before they can bring their claws to bear." Sir Hoster, old and half-crippled from wounds at the Green Fork, grunted. "It can work, so long as we do not tarry. The Lannisters will grow desperate, and desperate men make mistakes." Robb nodded. "We starve them, and when the time is ripe, we will strike at their heart." The weeks that followed were a blur of motion and violence. The northern fleet sailed under cover of fog and moonless night, slipping past the war galleys of House Lannister and their Fair Isle vassals. Robb watched as his wolves descended upon the trade lanes, silent as winter snow. Grain ships bound from Old Town, and the Arbor were set ablaze beneath the shadow of Fair Isle. Fat Lannister galleys, painted crimson and gold, gave chase but found only empty sea and scorched wreckage. At Lannisport, panic gripped the docks. The city had never been besieged by sea, not in living memory. Lords and merchants cursed and scrambled for ships to send word to King's Landing, their own galleys too slow to catch the Northmen in the narrow straits. By the time the Lannister fleet roused itself to sortie, the wolves had melted away, leaving only hunger and fear in their wake. To the south, Robb's raiders struck at the supply lines from the Reach. Galleys out of White Harbor sailed up the Mander, capturing barges laden with wheat and wine. The roads grew dangerous, every cart and wagon at risk from black-clad men with direwolf pins and river trout stitched upon their sleeves. The great granaries of the Reach grew emptier, while the price of bread in King's Landing soared. In the halls of the Red Keep, Queen Cersei paced like a caged lioness. Ravens came daily, some shrieking of fire and salt, others of sabotage and treachery. The city's stockpiles dwindled, and the small folk grew restless. In the Street of Flour, a riot broke out as hungry mothers fought for scraps of bread, and the gold cloaks were forced to cut them down in the mud. Pycelle, pale and trembling, counseled patience, but the queen's patience was a fraying rope. "Where is the Redwyne fleet?" she demanded of her council, her voice like a whip. "Why do we not sweep these northern rats from the sea?" Littlefinger smiled his oily smile. "The Redwynes are occupied with Stannis Baratheon, your grace, and Lord Mace is loath to risk his ships so far from the safety of the Arbor. The northern blockade is a clever trick, but it cannot last. Hunger breeds unrest, but gold buys loyalty, at least for a time." The queen's green eyes burned. "I want these wolves broken. I want their ships sunk and their young king's head upon a spike." Then de Shallow. At Casterly Rock, Lord Tywin Lannister received word of the blockade with a face like carved granite. He had expected boldness from Eddard Stark's son, but not cunning. The rock was rich, its vaults overflowing with gold. But gold could not conjure food from barren soil, nor fill the bellies of his soldiers. The small folk of the Westerlands, accustomed to plenty, now whispered of hunger and cursed the name Stark. Tywin summoned his bannermen, Lord Crakehall, Lord Kenning of Case, Lord Marbrand of Ashmark, and ordered his captains to sweep the Bay of Lannisport and drive the wolves into the deep. But the Northmen were ghosts, vanishing before the Lannister ships could close, and every month the price of bread rose higher. Even in the shadow of the rock, the illusion of Lannister invincibility began to crack. The high summer burned away into autumn. Robb's fleet, battered by storms and Lannister counterattacks, clung to the coast, striking at dawn and vanishing into the mists before sunset. The northern warships found willing allies among the fisherfolk and smuggler clans of the western coast. Gold passed hands, but the north paid better, with promises of freedom from Lannister levies and the protection of the wolf. At the mouth of the Tumblestone, Sir Brynden Tully led a daring raid, capturing 3 Lannister galleys and burning a supply depot meant for the city. Word spread like wildfire of the Blackfish's prowess, of the direwolf fleet haunting the western seas, of Tywin's failure to drive them out. By mid-autumn, the price of grain in King's Landing was beyond the reach of most smallfolk. Famine crept in the alleys, quiet and relentless. Food riots became a daily affair. Cersei's guards put them down with bloody efficiency, but every corpse in the gutter was another stone on the scales against Lannister rule. The Queen's enemies in the city began to stir. In the shadows of Flea Bottom, whispered songs mocked the lions and lauded the wolves. Bread riots turned into sabotage. Bakers hoarded flour. Millers skimmed off the top, and the gold cloaks were forced to patrol the docks day and night. In the council chamber, Pycelle aged a decade in weeks. The city cannot endure much longer, Your Grace. The commoners are hungry, and the nobles grow anxious. Even the Kingsguard have felt the pinch. Sir Meryn complains his rations are half what they were. Cersei's patience, long and thin, snapped at last. If the city starves, let the wolves choke on their own pride. We have gold enough to buy every sword in Essos, if need be. Namsi, Varys, the spider, spread his hands. But will those swords bring you bread, Your Grace, or loyalty? Once your city burns, she rounded on him, her eyes wild. Send word to Lord Tywin. Tell him the time for patience is past. The wolves must be broken, or we will all starve. On the far side of the war, Robb Stark stood upon the deck of the Sea-Wolf, eyes fixed upon the distant lights of Lannisport. The blockade had held. Reports from his scouts told of hunger in the city, unrest in the rock, and the Reach Lords furious that their trade was being strangled. His own fleet had paid dearly for its victories. 3 galleys lost in a single night's action off Fair Isle. Another burned by fireships north of the Arbor. Scores of Northmen and Riverlords lay at the bottom of the sea. But the blockade had worked. The Lannisters were bleeding, not in the open field but in the markets and granaries, the places where true power lay. The city would starve before winter's end unless the rock broke the wolves' jaws, or the red wine fleet returned. Robb's council met by lantern light, their faces gaunt with fatigue and hope. Sir Brynden spoke first, voice low. We have hurt them, Your Grace. The city riots daily. Tywin's hold on his bannermen weakens with every week. Our own men grow weary, but the prize is in sight. Lord Wyllis nodded. My father has sent word. White Harbor stands ready to send more ships if need be. The southern trade lanes are shut tighter than a miser's purse. And now, Jason Mallister, ever practical, pressed the question. What will the lions do when pressed? Tywin Lannister is not a man to starve quietly. Robb's eyes were cold as ice. He will strike, by land or sea it matters little. When he does, we must be ready. If he sorties with his fleet, we harry them from the flanks, draw them out and cut them to pieces in the shallows. If he marches, we fall back, burn the crops and leave him nothing but ashes. He looked to his mother, who watched with silent pride and sorrow. We must hold the line, no matter the cost. If we break now, all our sacrifice is for nothing. As autumn waned and the first snows touched the north, Robb's blockade stood firm. Hunger gnawed at the edges of Lannister power, and the realm teetered on the brink. The young wolf had made the sea his weapon, and the world waited to see if the lions would starve, or if winter's teeth would bite north and south alike. Ah, ka. The cold sharpened as autumn waned, and the early teeth of winter bit the western seas, the air so crisp it sliced the lungs with every breath. The blockade, stretched thin, became a living thing, always shifting, always under threat, yet still, remarkably, intact. To the west, the golden cliffs of Casterly Rock glinted in weak sun. The once bustling port of Lannisport, now a sullen, hungry city with ships rotting idle at their moorings. Every day, the fleet's captains woke uncertain whether they would face Lannister fire ships or a night raid from desperate Fair Isle sailors. Yet still, Robb Stark endured. He walked among the crews, a king who did not shrink from labor. He ate salt pork and stale bread with the oarsmen, listened to the tales of old seamen, and studied the tides and winds with the Manderley navigators. Gray wind prowled the decks at his side, a living shadow, the wolf's presence a balm and a warning both. The nights were worst. Cold mist settled over the sea, so thick a man could not see the prow from the stern. And in that hush every creak of the hull became the groan of some ghostly giant. Some men spoke of the drowned god's wrath, others of the old god's favor. Robb listened and weighed each word, and made a habit of waking just before dawn to stand in the icy air, watching the eastern sky. It was on such a morning that the sea delivered the first blow. A warning bell clanged from the Lady Grey, one of the White Harbor galleys guarding the northern end of the blockade. Robb, already at his post, saw the sail before the call reached him. Dark, square, alone. A ragged cog limping eastward with torn banners. Sir Brynden Tully was on the deck in an instant, his face as unreadable as a river stone. They took the cog under parley. The survivors were half dead with thirst, their faces gaunt, hair wild and matted, cloaks stiff with salt. They bore no sigil, only rags and desperation. Their leader, a grizzled Westerlander with a blackened eye, fell to his knees as soon as his boots touched the Sea Wolf's deck. "Mercy, my lords," he rasped. "We beg bread and water. The city starves. Lannisport is a graveyard. There are riots in the streets. The gold cloaks are gone, replaced by bravos with knives and hunger in their bellies. My own men turned on me when the bread ran out. We tried to slip the blockade, to find food in Fair Isle. But the seas are full of wolves." His voice cracked. Sir Willis Manderley exchanged a look with Robb. Even the Blackfish seemed troubled. "How long?" Robb asked softly. "How long since you last ate?" The man stared at his hands, thick with grime. 3 days. Some have gone to eating rats. The bakeries have all shut. The city guard hoards what little's left. The lion's teeth are sharp, but gold cannot fill a stomach." Robb saw the horror in his counsel's faces. Sir Brynden's voice was low and grim. "This is the third ship in a fortnight. The others bore the same tale. Lannisport, King's Landing, both gripped by hunger." Robb nodded, weighing the next step. "Word will spread to the Rock," he said, "and to Tywin. Hunger can topple thrones as surely as any sword." Catelyn Stark spent the days at Seaguard, where wounded men trickled in. Some burned, others battered by the sea, a few with fever in their wounds. She tended them with her own hands, speaking softly, always listening. The lords' wives and daughters joined her, learning to weave bandages and coax broth down a fevered throat. Outside, the commons watched the ships with equal parts awe and dread. The war had come to the sea, and the sea was unforgiving. Letters arrived from the south, ravens from Old Town and the Arbor, warning of Lannister gold buying up what little food the Reach could spare. Yet even there, the tides had turned. The Tyrells, never quick to spend a coin without hope of return, had grown wary of Cersei's demands and Tywin's threats. Reports told of Mace Tyrell sending more grain to Highgarden than to King's Landing, of gold cloaks turned away at dock, and starving refugees huddled in the shadow of the Hightower. Catelyn penned careful replies to her brother Edmure at River Run, and to Lord Wyman at White Harbor, urging patience and reminding them all that a war could be won with bread and hope as much as swords. At night, she prayed for her daughters. Sansa, in the Red Keep. Arya lost somewhere in the chaos of the Riverlands. She prayed for Robb too, for his heart as well as his sword. Sometimes she prayed for the Lannisters, though her heart was rarely in it. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei's world had narrowed to corridors and locked doors, to whispered threats and the ever-present stench of fear. The small council had grown smaller. Pycelle vanished to his books and filters. Littlefinger, absent more often than not, and even Varys less omnipresent than he once seemed. Only Qyburn lingered close, promising secrets and poisons that might yet tip the scales. King Tommen was ill, at least, so Cersei claimed. The city's unrest had grown so fierce that the boy king was rarely seen in public. Instead, Ser Meryn and the remaining Kingsguard patrolled the gates and the granaries, putting down riots with brutal efficiency. Bred riots bled into open rebellion. Even the gold cloaks grew restive, their pay late, their bellies empty. One night, Cersei stood on her balcony, gazing across Blackwater Bay. Fires burned on the horizon. Some from distant raiders, others from burning ships. She ground her teeth and gripped the cold stone. Hating the dark and the cold and the hunger, more than any enemy. How much longer must we endure this? She demanded of Qyburn, who lingered in the shadows behind her. The maester-turned spy bowed his head. A few weeks, perhaps. Your father must break the blockade, or all is lost. The small folk grow mutinous. There are rumors the faith is raising its banners. The Sept of Baelor has seen riots daily. Then let the faith starve with the rest. Cersei snapped, but her words rang hollow in the darkness. Tywin Lannister's patience, that legendary force of will, had begun to show cracks. The lions of the West had never known famine. Now, the great lords of the Westerlands begged him for bread, and every day brought news of another peasant rebellion or smuggler's haul lost to the wolves of the sea. At council, his captains bickered over strategy. The blockade cannot last, Lord Marbrand insisted. Their ships are too few. With a concerted push, we could sweep them aside. We have tried, growled Lord Kenning. They vanish into the mists, strike where we are weak, and bribe the fisherfolk to betray us. Then we must make an example, roared Crackahall. Hang a few smugglers, burn out the coastal villages. Let them learn the price of defying the lion. Tywin listened, his eyes sharp and cold. We will have our day. But if we break the wolves' fleet, it must be at a time and place of our choosing. He brooded over his options. Every sortie risked more than it promised. The lions were fierce, but ships and sailors could not be replaced as easily as gold. Yet if he waited, hunger would do what swords could not. The small folk of Lannisport and King's Landing would rise up, and rebellion was as contagious as plague. So he set his plan in motion. Gold bought informers among the Western Isles and the Reach. Ravens flew to Old Town and the Free Cities, promising payment to any captain who dared run the blockade. But every attempt ended in ashes. Robb Stark's wolves were too swift, too cunning, and every failure only deepened the city's misery. Desperate, Tywin summoned the Red Wine fleet, offering promises and threats in equal measure. But the Red Wines had troubles of their own. Stannis Baratheon still prowled the seas off Dragonstone, and no Lord of the Arbor would risk his best ships to be dashed to pieces in the narrow straits. Winter's breath swept down from the north, and with it came storms. The blockade, for all its cunning, was stretched near to breaking. 2 galleys were lost in a squall off Fair Isle, and 1 more was driven ashore and burned by Lannister raiders. Robb grieved each loss, walking among the survivors, mourning men had known by name. Sir Willis Menderley pressed for caution. Your Grace, our men are weary, and the seas are unforgiving. If Tywin pushes now, we may be too thin to hold. Robb nodded, gaze hardening. If we yield now, it will all have been for nothing. Winter always comes, Sir Willis, but the wolf endures. We will hold. Now. To stiffen the blockade, Robb sailed to White Harbor himself, standing in the hall before Lord Wyman. The old lord, massive and smiling even in crisis, greeted him with a bear's embrace. My king, you have made the wolf a lord of the sea, Wyman declared, voice booming down the hall. The Lannisters starve, and the reach has turned inward. But you cannot hold forever. Robb bowed his head. If we falter, my lord, the realm will burn. My sisters are still prisoners. The north is not yet free. Wyman nodded, thoughtful. Then take what ships you need. I will see White Harbor's stores opened, and see to it that the men of the fleet are fed and armed. But promise me, when you are king in truth, remember the men who starved and bled with you on the cold sea. Robb clasped the old man's arm. You have my word. Even as the north replenished, the Lannisters tightened their grip. In Lannisport, Tywin ordered the public execution of 12 smugglers and would-be rebels, their bodies left hanging at the gates. In King's Landing, Cersei's gold cloaks grew even more ruthless, but each act of violence only bred more hatred. Bread riots became barricades. The poor armed themselves with stones and knives, sometimes overwhelming the guards before being butchered. Sansa Stark watched it all from a high window. Heart sick with dread, the city was dying. She saw it in the faces of the servants, in the empty larders, in the haunted look in Tommen's eyes. She heard the whispers. The lioness is hungry, and her claws are red. In the darkest hour of night, Varys visited her. He came cloaked and quiet as always. My lady, he whispered. There is unrest in the city. The north presses hard from the sea. There may come a time when you must choose between loyalty to your captors and loyalty to your kin. Sansa shivered. I am a Stark, she said, her voice trembling but true. Then remember your words, when the city is aflame and the lions are desperate. His eyes flickered, and he was gone, a shadow melting into shadow. The final test came in the last weeks before snow fell on the Westerlands. The Lannister fleet, battered but desperate, sailed from Lannisport under cover of storm, led by Lord Marbrand himself. Tywin gambled everything on one blow: break the blockade, or see the city fall to hunger and despair. Robb, forewarned by fisherfolk loyal to the wolf, gathered his fleet in the shallows east of the city. The night was wild, a howling wind, sleet slashing the sails, the sea a fury of black and white. The two fleets met with a crash that echoed from the cliffs. Ballistae sang, stones and flaming arrows arcing across the waves. The Sea Wolf led the charge, ramming the lead Lannister galley amidships, splintering wood and bone. On the decks, men fought with axe and sword, cursing the cold and the dark and the gods. Gray wind leaped among the foes, fangs flashing, and for a moment Robb thought himself a wolf among sheep, the old blood of the north howling in his veins. Sir Brynden Tully, his voice a thunder in the storm, rallied the Riverlords. Hold the line, he cried, for the north, for the Riverlands. The battle swirled around him, a dance of death and glory. By dawn, the sea was strewn with wreckage and corpses, ships burning or broken, the cries of the wounded echoing off the cliffs. The Lannister fleet was shattered. Half sunk, the rest scattered westward. The blockade held, battered but unbroken. Robb walked the decks, blood on his hands, his cloak stiff with salt. See to the wounded, he told his men. No victory is worth their lives. The survivors cheered him, weary and ragged, and the banners of the wolf flew high above the battered fleet. In the aftermath, famine gripped the Westerlands and King's Landing. Riots grew to rebellion. Peasants armed with pitchforks rose in villages, sacking Lannister storehouses, while in the capital the small folk flooded the streets, crying for bread and justice. Cersei, besieged in the Red Keep, sent desperate pleas for aid. Tywin, pride finally broken, called for a council of peace, and Robb Stark, king in the north, stood atop the walls of Lannisport, watching as the last Lannister banners came down. Winter was here, and the wolf ruled the sea. Ka. Word of the Lannister defeat at sea swept the realm like wildfire carried on a northern wind. In Riverrun's great hall, Edmure Tully read the reports with awe and rising hope, his uncle's daring at Tumblestone matched by Robb's victory in the bay. In White Harbor, Lord Wyman Manderley declared a feast for every captain returned alive, and ordered double rations for every ship provisioning for the blockade. Yet not all was celebration. From Duskendale to the Golden Tooth, hunger stalked the land. The Riverlands, battered and bled by years of war, felt the change first. Bands of outlaws, desperate and wild, began raiding not for gold but for barley and bread, heedless of banners. The long winter that the old men had warned of was no longer a threat on the horizon. It had come. The Lannisters reeled in confusion, but Tywin was not a man to waste time licking his wounds. He gathered his war council in the cavernous shadows beneath Casterly Rock, his face harder than the stone itself. The lords who gathered before him looked to him for certainty, but for once, even the Lion of the West could offer only grim determination. He studied the latest messages, red wax cracked and gold thread glinting in the lamplight. King's Landing in riot, Lannisport in revolt, Fair Isle pleading for bread, House Payne's fields, barren beneath the first snows. Lord Marbrand, bandaged and pale, nursed a broken arm and a pride more grievously wounded. "We cannot last the winter without food," Marbrand said quietly. "The merchants hoard what little remains, and the fisherfolk refuse our coin. They say the North pays in freedom and promise, and gold is only good for the desperate." Crakehal's fist struck the table, rattling the wine. "Let us ride out, burn the fields, drive the rabble before us, make the wolves pay for every loaf they deny us." But Tywin silenced him with a look. "Violence will not conjure bread from salt and stone. To strike at the north now is folly. Their fleet dominates the western sea. Their wolves hunt the highways. We are besieged in all but name." He paused, the firelight glinting in his pale eyes. "There is but one hope. The Reach. We must buy grain whatever the price. If Mace Tyrell will not deliver, we must make him. Send a raven. Summon every merchant captain from Old Town to Volantis. Promise gold, promise titles, promise anything they ask. I will have bread before my people starve, or I will have the heads of those who refused me." Now, the lords nodded, though each knew in their hearts that the Tyrell's patience for Lannister arrogance was stretched thin. House Tyrell was not blind to the suffering of the capital, but with Stannis holding Storm's End and Robb holding the sea, the Golden Lion's threats had lost much of their bite. Tywin looked from lord to lord, measuring their fear and loyalty in a glance. "And send word to King's Landing. Tell the Queen to hold. Tell her that relief will come, by sea or by gold, before the moon turns. If she cannot hold the city, she must hold the Red Keep." He did not mention what would happen if she failed. Nender. In King's Landing, the small folk no longer whispered their discontent. They shouted it, sang it, screamed it from rooftops and gutters. The lines outside the bakeries grew longer, the loaves smaller. The gold cloaks, half-paid and hungry themselves, broke heads with increasing cruelty, but their numbers dwindled each day, with some deserting, others falling in alleys. Armed bands of starving men began to roam Flea Bottom and the Street of Flour, seizing food, breaking into granaries, and dragging bakers from their homes. Cersei Lannister, once so proud and so unassailable in her mother-of-pearl crown, now sat behind locked doors, her hair tangled and eyes red with sleepless rage. Tommen clung to her skirts, too frightened now even of his own guards. The small council chamber was empty more often than not. Pycelle had died in his sleep, of old age. Qyburn assured her, though Cersei suspected poison. Littlefinger was gone, vanished into the chaos with his own men and his ledgers. Only Qyburn and Sir Marintrant remained. Varys came to her in the early dawn, pale as a corpse, and reeking of perfume to hide the rot of the city. "Your Grace, the city is a tinderbox. Every street may blaze at a spark. The Septons have called for calm, but hunger does not listen to prayer." She slashed her hand through the air, cutting him off. "Where is my father's bread? Where is the gold that should buy it? Where are the ships he promised? Varys' eyes were sorrowful. The blockade endures, my queen. The North's wolves bite deep. The Reach will sell only at ruinous price, and most grain never reaches the city. Bandits, pirates, some say even small folk with wolf banners intercept the convoys. Cersei pressed her hands to her temples. Then burn them all, she hissed. Let them see what it means to deny a Lannister. But the city was past fear of fire. The queen's threats fell as empty as her storehouses. That night, the first gates fell. Rioters forced their way into the bread market, and when the gold cloaks tried to intervene, they were butchered alongside the bakers. 3 noblemen, cousins to the Red Wine and Hightower houses, were murdered in their own homes by hungry mobs. The bells tolled, and not for victory. Nam. Sansa Stark moved through the Red Keep in a haze, haunted by memories of home and the gnawing fear that the world outside the walls would finally come for her. Food was scarce even for the nobility, meals grown thin and tasteless, the kitchens echoing with empty pots and quieter voices. She saw the change in the eyes of the guards, saw it in the hollow faces of ladies who had never wanted for anything. One morning, Qyburn summoned her. The new Master of Whispers greeted her with the air of a confessor. "My lady, the city is not safe. There are those who would see the daughter of Eddard Stark become a token for ransom, or worse, a weapon to wield against the North. The Queen is less able to protect you than she once was." Then, Sansa felt her courage steel itself. "I am not a child, Maester. I will not run." Qyburn's smile was faint. "Bravery is admirable, but prudence is necessary. If the keep is breached, seek shelter in Maegor's Holdfast. Do not trust any man who does not wear the white cloak of the Kingsguard, or the badge of House Stark, should your brother's men reach the city." The words chilled her, but she remembered them. Out at sea, the blockade endured its own siege. With every victory, the wolves grew leaner. The storms of late autumn battered the galleys, splitting masts and flooding holds. Men froze on the decks, the howling winds tearing at banners and faces alike. Robb himself stood watch through the longest nights, refusing warmth or shelter, his eyes scanning the horizon for sails that might be friend or foe. It was in this bleak stretch, when hope began to flicker, that Robb's fleet netted a prize more valuable than any merchantman. A sleek, battered cog flying the gold and green of House Tyrell, taken while it tried to slip into King's Landing by night. Its captain, a Tyrell retainer named Sir Allard Beesbury, was brought before Robb, pale but defiant. Robb regarded him coldly. Why does the Reach risk its own ships to save the Lannisters? The Tyrells stand to inherit the city's favor if it falls. Sir Allard's chin lifted. A city starved is a city ruined. My lord, my lady Margaery, she is to wed the king if the gods are merciful. The Tyrells wish only peace and an end to this madness. Madness. Robb's tone cut like a northern blade. The madness began when the Lannisters struck at my house, killed my father, and stole my sisters. There can be no peace while the lion holds the wolf's kin in chains. Sir Allard hesitated. Then let me send word. Let me tell Lady Olenna and Lord Mace that the North is not the enemy. There may be terms. Robb considered. The Manderleys and Tullys debated heatedly, but in the end, the king made his decision. "You may send your message," he said at last. "Tell your lords that if they bring bread to the Riverlands and the North, we will grant their ships safe harbor. Let them try to feed King's Landing, and we will not guarantee their safety. The city is lost to the Lannisters, whether they admit it or not." "Men?" Sir Allard nodded, hope warring with fear in his eyes. "Ben?" In Highgarden, Lady Olenna Tyrell read the message with pursed lips. The old woman's hands trembled not from age, but from the weight of the future. "The wolf is clever," she muttered to Mace, who fretted nearby. "If we feed the North, we gain a friend. If we feed the Lannisters, we gain only a pit of corpses." Mace puffed his cheeks, glancing at a map. "But our interests lie with the Iron Throne." Olenna's glare cut him short. "Our interests lie with our own. Bread buys more loyalty than swords, and there are more hungry mouths in the North then in the Rock. Send grain to White Harbor and River Run. Tell the ships for King's Landing to await my seal. If the city burns, let it be Lannister gold that pays for the ashes. Men? Almighty. Now. In the north, as new grain arrived from the Reach and the Manderleys threw open their storehouses, Robb called his lords together. The blockade had succeeded. Now it was time to press the advantage. A raven arrived from River Run, Edmure's seal stark against the parchment. The West rebels, Edmure's letter read. Lannisport in open revolt, smaller houses deserting the Lion, some offering to open their gates for mercy and bread. Tywin retreats to the Rock. Cersei is besieged in the Red Keep. Robb read the words aloud to his council, their cheers echoing into the misty night. It is time, he said, to march. The wolves moved as winter does. Swift and silent, men and ships swept down from the neck, through the riverlands and along the crumbling highways, rallying outlaws and hungry folk alike. Robb sent letters before his march, promising food and mercy to those who bent the knee, and swift justice to those who did not. The war turned. Lannister garrisons surrendered. Seeing no hope in starvation, some of Tywin's own bannermen defected. Houses Crakehall and Lefford, proud in the past, now desperate for survival. By the time Robb reached the Gold Road, his army had swollen with fresh recruits, hungry for justice and bread. And now, in King's Landing, the last defenses crumbled. The small folk, desperate and wild, stormed the gates in a fury that even the gold cloaks could not quell. Fires rose in the city, banners burned, and the Faith declared an end to Lannister tyranny. Cersei held out in the Red Keep, every corridor filled with shadows and treachery. Tommen wept in his chambers, his mother's words cold comfort against the roar outside. When the wolf banners appeared at the city's edge, the small folk opened the gates with their own hands. Sansa watched from the ramparts, her heart thundering. She saw the gray and white standards streaming over the ruined city, saw gray wind at their head, and knew at last that the North had come. Robb rode through streets carpeted with ash and sorrow, his cloak muddy, his face haggard, but the city greeted him as a liberator. Children clung to his stirrups. Women wept with relief. Men knelt in the gutters. The Red Keep surrendered before sunset, its doors thrown open to the young king. Cersei stood on the throne dais, her gown torn, her hair loose. "You think you have won, wolf?" She spat, her voice thin as parchment. "You have inherited a graveyard." Robb's answer was soft but unyielding. "A graveyard can be rebuilt. Your reign is over." Then to see. She sank to her knees, and the throne room filled with the silence of an old wound closing. Sansa ran to her brother, tears streaming. He held her close, trembling, and for a moment there were no kings, no banners, no war. Only a brother and a sister, and the hope of spring beyond winter's shadow. The war had been won with ships and hunger, with patience and pain. As Robb Stark looked over the battered city, he understood at last. To rule was not only to fight, but to endure, to heal, and to rebuild from ruin. The North had starved the lion, but now the wolf must feed the realm. He turned his gaze north, toward Winterfell, and prayed that peace would follow in the wake of famine, that justice and hope would grow where gold had failed. "Oh, ha. It looks like your message just says, V. Did you want to continue the story, or was that a typo? Let me know what you'd like next. More of the story, a summary, a new direction, or anything else." Blondie. The first snows drifted over the scorched stones of King's Landing, settling in gutters still black with ash. The city lay broken and quiet in the aftermath of conquest. The echo of riots replaced by the shivering hush of a people not yet daring to hope. The wolves held the gates and the keep. Robb Stark, now king in more than name, wore no crown and sat on no throne, but his word was law, carried from the battered Red Keep to every square, market, and alley. The direwolf banners draped from the ramparts brought as much relief as they did unease, for though the lions were caged, winter's shadow had not yet lifted from the city. On the dawn after the surrender, Robb walked the ramparts above the city. gray wind padding at his side, breath misting in the bitter air. Sansa stood beside him, eyes red with exhaustion but unbowed, her cloak pulled tight around her against the cold. Below, the city stirred, reluctant, uncertain, haunted by hunger and the memory of violence. Robb's gaze was heavy. They expect everything to change at once: bread, peace, justice. But what is left to give them? Sansa was silent for a time, her breath barely stirring. You gave them hope. It's more than they had. The rest, we must build, piece by piece. That's how the North endures winter. That's how the city will survive. Then, he looked at her, searching for the girl he remembered, and seeing instead the steel beneath. You're wise, little sister. She smiled faintly. Not the bright, thoughtless smile of a summer child, but the quiet pride of a survivor. I'm a Stark. We survive or we die. Behind them, Sir Brynden Tully emerged from the stair, his face lined with exhaustion, but lit by triumph. My king, the small folk gather in the great Septui. The High Septon asks for your presence. He says the city needs to see you. Then done. Robb nodded, bracing himself for the weight of their expectation. Very well. Sansa, come with me. The walk through the city was slow, flanked by Riverland and Northern guards. People crowded the streets, not shouting or jeering as they might have months ago, but watching in hungry silence. Children with hollow eyes clung to doorways. Robb's own men were drawn and hollow-cheeked from the siege, yet they held themselves tall, bearing the wolf with grim pride. In the great sept, what remained of the nobility and clergy knelt as Robb entered, the High Septon rising to greet him. There were no songs, no feasts, no crowns. The only sound was the faint sob of a child, and the low hum of prayers whispered for the dead. The High Septon's voice echoed in the cold air. The gods have seen fit to deliver us from tyranny, yet famine and fear remain. Will you, Robb Stark, king in the north and now in the city, bring peace and plenty to this land? Robb met his gaze. I cannot conjure bread from air, nor can I heal every wound with a word. But the north keeps its promises. Those who lay down arms will be fed. Those who serve the city, not themselves, will be rewarded. We will open the storehouses and bring in grain from the Reach and the Riverlands. We will judge the guilty and spare the innocent. The wars of gold and pride are finished. Let the rebuilding begin. Now, there was no applause, but the silence was different. Heavy, not with dread but with waiting. As Robb left, Sansa squeezed his hand. It's a start. Dender. The days that followed were a test harsher than any battle. The wolves had won the city, but not its peace. Robb's first act was to throw open the royal granaries, distributing what stores remained with the help of the Faith and the city's surviving guilds. The gold left in the treasury, he turned to the task of buying food from every corner of Westeros that would sell it, and sending ships as far as Pentos for grain and salted fish. He called a council of the realm, not of the old lords who had supported the Lannisters, but of men and women who had shown courage in the siege. The new High Septon, Sir Brynden Tully, Sir Wylis Manderly representing White Harbor, a handful of Riverland knights, the sharp-eyed mistress of the Bakers' Guild, even a smuggler chieftain from the docks. Sansa sat at his side, her advice quiet but firm, and Arya's empty place between them, a silent wound. The council faced impossible tasks. The city's wells were fouled, its gates ruined, its walls cracked. The Faith demanded recompense for its losses, the guilds pressed for protection from bandits, and everywhere was the gnawing hunger. But bit by bit, the city began to change. Each day, small folk brought their troubles to the Red Keep, and each day, Robb or Sansa or Brynden Tully heard their pleas. Robb issued pardons to small folk who had joined the riots, but not to those lords who had profited from famine. Several Lannister loyalists were stripped of lands and titles, and a handful executed when their crimes could not be denied. The worst of the Gold Cloaks, notorious for their brutality, were hanged in the square. Yet Robb refused a general vengeance. If the North can forgive, so must the city. We must bind wounds, not open them anew. Rumors of the king's justice spread, and by the first true snow, the city was calmer. Bread was still scarce, but no longer impossible to find. The first ships from the Reach arrived, laden with wheat and apples, and Sansa herself oversaw the distribution of food in the poorest districts. She walked the alleys without guards, speaking to women and children, learning the measure of their suffering. By her word, the bakers' ovens burned late into the night. Winter's hold remained, but for the first time, the people of King's Landing did not tremble in the streets. Instead, they began to hope, and hope grew as swiftly as the rumor that the Wolf King had spared even his enemies, if they bent the knee and worked for peace. Word of the city's fall spread across the Seven Kingdoms on wings of terror and relief. In the west, Tywin Lannister received the news with a silence that chilled even his hardiest bannerman. He did not weep or rage, only set his wine cup aside and stared into the fire until dawn. Within days, lords began defecting. House Crakehall, House Lefford, House Marbrand, each sending word to Robb Stark of their fealty, their hunger, and their willingness to parley for peace. At Riverrun, Edmure Tully's household celebrated, but Brynden Blackfish cautioned restraint. The lion is wounded, but not slain. Winter will test us all, and Tywin may seek vengeance yet. We must hold fast, defend our gains, and prepare for treachery. The Riverlands, long ravaged by both lion and wolf, began to heal. Food convoys from the Reach, now traveling under Stark banners, made their way along the Green Fort. Manderly ships patrolled the Trident, keeping the highways clear. The Brotherhood without banners, once rebels, now found their efforts aligned with the Wolf King's justice. Beric Dondarrion and Thoros of Mer rode openly into villages to help distribute food, healing old wounds with hard labor and honest coin. In White Harbor, Lord Wyman Manderly proclaimed a festival of ice and bread, sending word to every corner of the North that King Robb had broken the city and returned honor to House Stark. The North began to stir, sending timber and salted meat south, eager for trade and grateful that, at last, the bloodletting seemed to have found its end. But not all were pleased with the new order. In the Reach, Mace Tyrell vacillated between outrage and calculation. His mother, Lady Olenna, saw opportunity and wrote sly, careful letters to Robb and Sansa both. Bread and roses are stronger than swords, your grace. My granddaughter still waits to be wed. Perhaps a new alliance could keep the realm whole. Robb read the letter with care, but set it aside. He trusted neither Tyrell roses, nor the whispers of old women. We will trade, we will feast, but the North will not bend to Highgarden or the Rock. Sansa, shrewder than he, penned a reply of gratitude, inviting Lady Olenna to send a delegation to discuss terms for peace and the possibility of a great council. The realm is hungry, my lady, and we need friends more than enemies. Deep in the dungeons of the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister lingered, a shadow of her former self. Robb had refused to execute her, though many counseled it. Instead, she was kept in fair but strict confinement, allowed to see Tommen but not to rule. Her hair had grown wild, her face thin, yet her eyes had lost none of their malice. When Robb visited, she met him with scorn. You think this city will love you? They will turn on you the first time you fail them. They always do. Robb met her gaze. If they do, I will face them. That is the price of rule. But I will not be a tyrant, and I will not kill a woman who cannot fight for herself. She laughed, bitter and broken. Mercy is weakness. Remember that when winter truly comes. He left her in her stone cell, and when the door closed, the last of her laughter faded into silence. And with the city quiet and order restored, Robb began to turn his thoughts northward. Sansa's eyes grew distant when he spoke of Winterfell, and he knew her heart ached to see their home rebuilt. Rumors reached them of Bran and Rickon, alive and hidden, and of wildlings massing beyond the wall, of white shadows in the woods and old gods stirring in the ice. The war for the realm was won, but new dangers loomed. cold and deep as the snows themselves. Yet Robb did not rush to leave the city. He sent trusted lords. Sir Brynden to the Riverlands, Sir Wylus to White Harbor, Sansa to oversee the reconstruction of the ruined keep and the care of orphans and widows. He held open court in the throne room, judging disputes and dispensing justice, winning the loyalty of the city, not with fear, but with the promise of a better spring. On the longest night of winter, a feast was held in the great hall, the tables laden with whatever food could be found, the banners of wolf, trout, and merman hanging side by side. Robb sat at the high table, Sansa to his right, the blackfish to his left. The hall was full of laughter and song for the first time in years. A ragged bard sang a new song, the ballad of the Wolf King's siege, while children ran and played between the benches, chasing gray wind as he lolled by the fires. Sansa smiled, her eyes shining with hope and sorrow all at once. Robb raised his cup to the people of the city, and they rose in answer, their voices rising like the promise of dawn. "We have endured famine and fire, cruelty and chaos," Robb said. "Let this night be the beginning of peace. The wars of the past are finished. In spring, we will plant again. In winter, we will endure together. The wolf does not rule by fear, but by strength and honor. And any who keep the peace will find a friend in the north." Then, the hall erupted in cheers. Outside, the snow fell soft and silent on the city, blanketing the wounds of war, promising the slow, painful birth of something new. Now, far away, in a lonely chamber in the west, Tywin Lannister penned a final letter. "Let the North have its victory," he wrote, "for winter never lasts forever, and the lion endures." He sealed the letter with gold wax and handed it to his last loyal squire. "Take this to the Reach and to Dorne if you must. Tell them the Rock will not kneel, nor forget." Bah! Yet even Tywin knew in his heart that the realm had changed. Gold could buy swords, but it could not fill empty bellies or restore trust once broken. Robb Stark walked the walls one last time, gray wind at his heel, and gazed across the city to where the dawn broke pink and cold over the ruins of Flea Bottom. Sansa joined him, silent and content, and together they watched as the city woke, not to fear or hunger, but to the slow labor of rebuilding. The dire wolf's howl rang clear and true, and from the shadows of broken stones, hope answered. The war was over. The famine eased. In the teeth of winter, a wolf ruled the city, and the first hints of spring began to grow. Even in victory, the shadow of winter never fully left King's Landing. The snows that blanketed the roofs and gutters lingered into the heart of the city, the icy wind blowing from the Blackwater and chilling every corner, filling cracks in the red stones with frost. As the year's end approached, hope fought for every inch of ground it could win from memory, hunger, and fear. Rebuilding was slow and hard, but it was the only work left worth doing. Robb Stark rose before dawn each morning, not out of habit, but out of need. He took his breakfast with the night's watchmen who'd come south as envoys, black cloaks trailing on the flagstones, the youngest boys marveling at the splendor of a city they'd only known in song. Sometimes he would walk the docks as the sun rose over the bay, speaking to fishermen and shipwrights, seeing with his own eyes how the city starved and hungered for more than bread. Hungry for certainty, for safety, for peace. It was a hunger Robb had learned to recognize, for it was a hunger he carried in his own bones. By day, he sat in council in the ruined throne room, presiding over the endless disputes of a city pulled apart and not yet stitched back together. The lords and ladies of the realm still bickered over titles and taxes. But more often Robb found himself speaking to smiths, masons, mothers, orphans, folk who cared nothing for gold or glory and only wanted walls to shelter them, work to feed them, and someone who listened when they spoke. Sansa was everywhere, in the bakeries and the soup kitchens, in the silent halls of the Red Keep, in the broken septs and orphanages. It was said that a hungry child's best hope was to find the Lady Sansa and tell her their sorrow. She had the look of a true queen, one shaped by sorrow and loss, not by jewels or courtly wit. She wrote letters to the north, to the Vale, to the Reach, and even to the east, her pen as sharp as her brother's sword. Merchants found her fair but unsparing, and the poor adored her as one of their own. The new order settled, if only by degrees. The faith, seeing no profit in further bloodshed, threw its weight behind the new king and his sister. The High Septon led prayers each evening for the city's deliverance, and spoke often of mercy, of forgiveness, of a dawn after nightfall. Robb encouraged it. The small folk needed hope, and even those who still feared the wolf's banner above the Red Keep could not deny the food in their bellies, the salt for their wounds, the promise of justice that did not come on the edge of a sword. Yet everywhere, the cost of conquest made itself felt. The gold left in the treasury was never enough. The lords of the West, broken but not destroyed, sent embassies bearing olive branches and warnings alike. The Reach pressed for influence, sending offers of marriage and trade. In the north, rumors spread of growing unrest in the wild lands beyond the wall. And in the east, the shadow of dragons flickered in the talk of sailors and exiles. On a morning colder than most, Robb summoned his council to the small hall. The fires burned low, the air thick with the tang of wet wool and burning wood. Sir Brynden Tully sat at his right, eyes sharp, while Sir Willis Manderley and the lady of the bakehouse, Mistress Elise, flanked him. Sansa was there, silent and attentive, her fingers entwined in her lap. At the foot of the table, Maester Theomore shuffled his parchments, preparing his daily report. "We are feeding the city, but just," Elise said. "The grain from the Reach and White Harbor is enough for now. But our reserves run low, and the price of bread rises with each week of winter. We have nothing to plant come spring if we spend it all now." Sir Willis' jowls trembled as he nodded. "My lord, White Harbor's ships are still strong. We can run the blockade, buy grain in pentos and bravos. But even there, the price is dear. Every man in Essos knows King's Landing is hungry." Robb rubbed at his eyes. "We need a true harvest, not a trickle of wheat from the east. When spring comes, we must have seed and safe fields. I want the lands north and south of the city cleared, the roads repaired, the villages repopulated. If we cannot plant, we cannot hope to hold the city another year." Sir Brynden's voice was dry as dust. And the lords of the West grow restless. Tywin's hand is still felt. His envoys speak of peace, but his gold buys swords and loyalties as quick as ever. He's offered terms, generous ones, for the return of Lannister hostages and the pardon of his bannermen. Robb's face hardened. He offers peace, but waits for us to stumble. We will not return his prisoners until the last of my sisters is safe, until every village and holdfast is accounted for. And if his lords want pardon, let them come to the city and bend the knee. We'll take no more promises sealed in gold." Sansa's eyes flickered. "Let them come. Show them the cost of what they've done. The orphan halls, the burned streets, the graves. Then offer mercy. Mercy binds tighter than fear." "Now, sir." Robb inclined his head, proud and grateful, all at once. It was not just the West that pressed the young king. Mace Tyrell's latest letter arrived, full of flowery compliments and thinly veiled demands. "Let my daughter be wed to your king," Mace wrote, "and the grain of the Reach will flow like water, and peace will settle over the realm like a gentle rain." Robb smiled grimly as he read it aloud to Sansa. He would see his daughter Queen of the South, and perhaps even Queen in the North. Yet he did not send a single ship to aid us when the blockade was tightest. "Then?" Sansa was shrewd. "Let him wait. The people will remember who fed them in winter and who sought only advantage." By week's end, a small delegation arrived from the west. Lord Crakehall, Lord Lefford, and the remnants of House Marbrand. They came cloaked and humble, heads bowed, their faces thin and their eyes wary. They were ushered into the small hall, where Robb received them not as conqueror, but as ruler. Lord Crakehall knelt. "Your Grace." We come seeking pardon for ourselves and our folk. The lion's pride is broken, but the land still starves. Give us peace, and we will pledge you our swords and our stores." Da. Robb weighed them in silence, then extended his hand. "Rise. You have seen the cost of war. There will be no more bloodshed. Send word to your people. Let those who wish for peace come to the city, swear their oaths, and take bread from my hand. Those who still follow Tywin Lannister's gold must answer for their crimes." They nodded, relief and shame mingling in their faces. That evening, Robb and Sansa walked together in the Godswood, the heart tree frosted and stark. He confessed his fear. "I worry that when spring comes, I'll have made more enemies than friends. The realm is brittle, Sansa. I rule only so long as I feed them, and winter is long." She squeezed his arm, steady as stone. "Father said the North endures because we remember who we are. Remind them, Robb. If you rule as a Stark, with mercy and honor, they will follow you in spring as they do now in snow. But never forget the wolves who wait beyond the gates." It was not all trouble. Small miracles bloomed in the cracks. A bakery rebuilt on the Street of Flower became the city's first school for orphans, Sansa herself teaching the eldest girls their letters. The rivers swelled with spring melt, and fisherfolk from as far as the sisters arrived, hoping to find a city that paid fairly for salt cod and eel. In Flea Bottom, an old woman planted a secret garden in a ruined courtyard, and her herbs found their way to the sickbeds of the keep. Robb made a habit of walking the city each week, unguarded but for gray wind, listening to the complaints and hopes of the commons. Once, a crowd of beggars parted for him, silent as snow, and a child with a dirty face offered him a withered apple. Robb knelt, accepted the gift, and gave the boy his silver wolf's head brooch in return. Word of it traveled fast, and by the next day, beggars lined the avenues near the Red Keep, each hoping to catch the king's eye. The lords of the city, old and new, watched with guarded awe as the Wolf King and his sister bent the realm not with iron, but with care. At times, Edmure Tully wrote from Riverrun, fretting over river trade and unruly vassals, but always signing his letters with pride. "The realm is whole. The North and Riverlands are true again." But even in this peace, danger crept nearer. From the north, word came of wildling bands crossing the wall, of white shadows in the snow, of the old gods stirring in the haunted forests. The Night's Watch begged for aid, sending brothers south to plead for men and grain. Robb heard them and dispatched food and volunteers northward, and sent ravens to every lord from Skagos to White Harbor. Winter's enemies do not carry banners. In the east, ships from Lys and Mur brought rumors of fire and dragon wings. Merchants spoke of a Targaryen girl building her own fleet in faraway Slaver's Bay, freeing slaves and swearing vengeance on the usurpers of Westeros. Sansa listened closely to these tales, for she remembered the songs of her girlhood, and wondered if one day the wolf's rule might be challenged, not by lion or rose, but by dragon. Robb brooded over these threats, but would not let them cloud his days. He turned the city to the work of spring, repairing the walls, restoring the granaries, finding land for every refugee. Under Sansa's guidance, the orphan halls grew into proper schools, and the poorest girls learned to spin and sew and write. On the first true day of spring, she led 100 children from Flea Bottom to the Godswood, planting flowers around the heart tree and singing the old songs of the North. Then now. The summer that followed was gentle, the harvests better than any had hoped. The city's wounds healed, though scars remained. The wolf banner still flew above the Red Keep, and Robb Stark, once king in the North, was now king in truth, a ruler made not by gold or fire, but by famine, mercy, and hope. He stood on the battlements as the first green leaves unfurled below, Sansa at his side, the city's bells ringing in the distance. "We have endured," he said softly, pride and wonder in his voice. "Perhaps the realm will too." Sansa took his hand, and for a long moment, the wolf siblings watched the sun rise over a city reborn, knowing that though winter would come again, so too would spring. And in that hope, the wolf's reign endured. Ka. The rising sun spilled over King's Landing, gilding the city's patchwork roofs in soft gold, as spring matured into a season of slow, hard-won rebirth, where winter's chill had left the streets deserted and the spirits hollow. Now people ventured out in cautious hope. The blackened remains of riot and siege were still visible, burned-out inns, crumbling stone, the shell of the bread market. But in their place, the beginnings of new life appeared. Saplings lined the avenue from the Mudgate to the Great Septade, planted by Sansa's orphans, each one a promise that the wolf's rule would outlast winter's shadow. Robb Stark ruled from the solar of Maegor's Holdfast, a chamber once made infamous by blood and cruelty, but now transformed with banners of white and gray, a hearth always burning and tables cluttered with letters and ledgers. Each day brought a dozen small crises and one or two threats that might change the course of the realm. Most days, he saw more tradesmen and healers than knights and lords. He learned to recognize the rhythm of the city, the rising hum of industry at dawn, the haggling in the squares, the laughter of children chasing one another in the gardens Sansa had reclaimed from ruin. He saw to it that justice was swift but not cruel, that food reached every district, and that no one, not even the last Lannister loyalist, starved within his walls. Yet peace in the capital did not mean peace everywhere. The Riverlands were a tapestry of green fields and hidden wounds. Robb traveled with his retinue to Riverrun, the slow passage of his host, more a parade of carpenters, masons and carts full of tools, than a conquering army. The roads, still pitted from years of war, began to see repairs. At every crossing, villagers greeted their king with awe and wariness, offering bread and salt as much from relief as loyalty. At Riverrun, Edmure Tully greeted Robb with open arms. The Blackfish presided over a court that was brisk and fair, but the scars of the Lannister invasions ran deep. Many of the old Riverlord houses were broken, their heirs slain, their halls burned or abandoned. In the Great Hall, Robb held council with the surviving lords and those who'd come to seek pardon. A boy, no older than Bran had been, presented himself, a scion of House Derry, orphaned and near starved, his inheritance nothing but a battered sigil and a stubborn pride. Robb knelt and looked the boy in the eye, remembering the ruined halls of his own childhood. "You are Lord Derry now," Robb told him, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Take this ring, take your house, and swear fealty not to the north, not even to the Starks, but to the realm we build together. If you do, I will send you masons, carpenters, and a spring's worth of seed. You will not be alone." The boy's eyes shone. Around them, other lords, once fearful, now hopeful, came forward to swear the same. At night, Robb and Edmure walked the walls, the river running black and silver beneath the moon. "Will the realm hold?" Edmure asked, worry etched into the lines of his face. "I remember my father's words. Rivers cannot be tamed for long, and peace is a dam that always cracks." Robb clasped his uncle's shoulder. "Peace is not the absence of storms. It's the will to rebuild after every flood. The North will stand by the Riverlands, now and always." When Robb returned to King's Landing, he brought with him not only fresh pledges, but convoys of food and tools, new songs sung by children, and the quiet beginnings of a realm coming together, not from conquest but from healing. In the city, Sansa had become a legend in her own right, the Lady of Mercy, the Queen of Flower, the Red Rose of the Red Keep, names whispered in every alley and square. She had begun a correspondence with Lady Olenna Tyrell, exchanging wisdom and seeds, and by spring's height, arrangements for a new council, a gathering of Westeros leading ladies to discuss famine relief, trade, and the laws that bound both lords and smallfolk. It was Sansa who insisted that the new city guard, drawn from every district, and not just noble sons, swear an oath to defend the weak above all. It was Sansa who saved the old Godswood from being cleared, who convinced Robb to set aside rooms in the keep for orphan children to learn their letters. Even the former enemies of House Stark found themselves drawn to her, some out of guilt, some out of hope, and some simply because she listened and remembered every name and sorrow. One late afternoon, as Sansa taught a group of children to plant herbs in a ruined cloister, Sir Wellis Manderly arrived with a letter from the docks. Robb was in the yard, watching the new city guard drill with gray wind sprawled at his feet. Sir Willis pressed the letter into his king's hand, face grave. "It's from the east," he said. "Ships bearing a red sun. Dorn has sent envoys." Robb read quickly. The letter was written in a graceful hand, each word edged with both caution and challenge. Prince Doran Martell, it seemed, wished to negotiate peace and trade, and perhaps a measure of justice for old wounds, unhealed by the fall of Lannisters alone. Robb sent word at once for the council to assemble. When the Dornish arrived, they were unlike any delegation the North or Riverlands had known. Proud men and women in flowing robes, with faces veiled and eyes keen. At their head was Arianne Martell, daughter of Doran, sharp as a blade and cool as river water. They met in the solar. Robb offered bread and salt, and Sansa poured the wine herself, the old rites honored before any talk of alliances. Arianne's gaze was frank, her voice low. "Dorn remembers Aelia. Dorn remembers every child slain. Every betrayal. Every slight. The Lannisters have paid in blood, but the wound is not closed. If you wish peace, Robb Stark, then know this. Dorn will not kneel to any crown but its own." "Then?" Robb inclined his head. "I do not ask Dorn to kneel. I ask for trade. Grain for oranges, ships for horses, the open roads and rivers. Let the South and North meet in the middle, as equals, not as conqueror and conquered." Arianne studied Sansa, then Robb. "And justice for old wrongs?" Robb met her eyes. "Justice, not vengeance. Those guilty of Aelia's murder are dead, disgraced, or fled. Those who remain will face judgment, not the sword." Then they talked long into the night, wine flowing, tempers flaring, and then cooling. At last, when the candles guttered low, Arianne rose. "You may have your trade, Stark. And one day, perhaps your friendship. Control." It was a small step, but Sansa knew it mattered more than any battle won at sea. That night, as she returned to her chambers, she paused at the window and watched the city's lanterns flickering, her heart swelling with something she barely dared name. Pride. And the faintest echo of happiness. Elsewhere, in the city's tangled streets, the first signs of true unity appeared. The city guard patrolled with a new confidence, petty thefts declining as famine eased. The Faith worked alongside Sansa's new guilds to care for the sick and aged, no longer preaching fear of wolves but gratitude for peace. Orphan boys were apprenticed to smiths, and girls to the looms and kitchens. The bells that had once tolled for riot now rang for festivals of bread and hope. But peace remained fragile. Word arrived from the wall that wildlings had crossed in greater numbers than ever before, and that the Night's Watch was hard-pressed to hold the passes. Maester Theomore warned of reports from Old Town, of strange storms at sea, of ships lost without trace, and rumors that dragons had been seen in the Far East, black wings blotting out the sun. Robb knew that a wise king could not rest on the victories of one season. He met with the Night's Watch envoys, promised men and supplies for the wall, and ordered his banners readied, quietly but firmly. Sansa met with her council of ladies, planning contingencies for famine or flight, while Sir Brynden Tully dispatched trusted scouts to every lord and landed knight in the Riverlands. As the days lengthened, ambassadors from the Reach, the Vale, and the Stormlands arrived, seeking trade, alliances, or at least assurances that the Wolf's justice would not turn on them. With each council, Robb grew in confidence, learning to weigh promise against peril. He refused offers of marriage from ambitious houses, saying simply that his duty was to his people and his kin. On the first warm day of true summer, Sansa and Robb stood together on the ramparts as a procession of villagers from the Crownlands brought gifts. Bread, honey, and rough-woven tapestries depicting a dire wolf and a flowering rose. Sansa received their tokens with grace, thanking each by name. "You did this," Robb told her quietly, pride and affection mingling in his voice. Sansa shook her head. "We did. The city healed because the North, brought justice and hope. If we keep our promises, perhaps it will last. That evening, Robb rode through the city, gray wind at his side, the streets alight with torches and laughter. From the Sept to the Street of Silk, from the wharves to the Blackwater, the city glowed not with fire but with hope, a living testament to the hard work of peace. In the solar, as the bells rang midnight, Sansa looked over the city and wrote in her diary, "The war starved the lion, but mercy feeds the realm. The wolf's banner flies over a kingdom that is not conquered, but redeemed." No. And in the hush that followed, as summer warmed the stones and rivers, King's Landing at last began to live not in the shadow of famine and fear, but in the quiet, trembling light of renewal. A city and a realm guided by the iron hand and gentle heart of the Starks. Blockade. And now, Ishay. Something went wrong. Please try reloading the conversation. The summer wore on, the air thick with the scents of new grass and river silt, and the city that had been brought to its knees by famine now drew its first full breath as a living thing. King's Landing, for all its wounds, seemed to pulse with the energy of a patient whose fever had finally broken. But even as the wolf banners fluttered on the ramparts, even as the laughter of children and the songs of laborers drifted through the markets and streets, the scars of the old war remained. Healing was never without pain. The rebuilding of King's Landing had grown beyond the labor of masons and carpenters. It had become the labor of every soul who called the city home. Sansa's orphan children swept the steps of the great septand and planted wildflowers in the courtyards of the ruined manors along Visenya's hill. On the Street of Flour, the city's bakers invented a bread they called wolf loaf. Dense and sweetened with dried berries, it was meant to last through lean weeks and remind all who tasted it of the North's generosity. Sansa saw to it that the first batch went to the poorest families in Flea Bottom. Robb rode the length of the city each dawn with gray wind at his side, passing through the shadows and alleys where, months before, men would have spit or thrown stones at a stark cloak. Now they called out greetings, and the city's ills were spoken openly. High prices, broken roofs, thieves, or even rumors of fire in the western hills. But the complaints were no longer edged with despair or sullen rage. Robb listened to them all, promising help when he could, judgment when it was needed, and silence when the pain was too fresh for words. With each passing week, the city's heartbeat grew stronger. The docks were crowded again, not with war galleys but with fishing boats and trading cogs from the narrow sea. Goods that had been hoarded for gold, salt, barley, honey, lamp oil, were now traded for the labor of the people. The city's new council of guilds, bakers, butchers, masons, weavers, and carpenters met each week in the solar, working with Sansa and Sir Brynden Tully to ensure fairness. Some nights the arguments lasted until dawn, but by day the work was done, and the bread ovens glowed. The Riverlands, too, found new vigor. At River Run, Edmure Tully threw open his gates to every house whose banners had once flown for the lion. The price of forgiveness was labor. Each man and woman was set to clearing fields, repairing roads, or building levees for the next flood. The Blackfish oversaw the harvest, riding daily between outlying villages and the granaries at Fairmarket. Each bushel of grain was counted and weighed, and Edmure sent regular convoys south to King's Landing, knowing famine could return with the first hard winter. In the west, Tywin Lannister had retreated into the granite fastness of Casterly Rock. His bannermen, deprived of both gold and pride, now sent quiet, careful envoys to the new court. Robb received each in turn, Lefford, Crakehull, even the stubborn Marbrands, offering peace on the same terms. Fealty to the realm, justice for those who'd profited by the city's suffering, and the opening of their storehouses to hungry mouths, lion or wolf. There were grumblings, but Robb's word was law now, and no one dared challenge it openly. Yet for all the outward peace, the Game of Thrones did not pause. The Reach pressed its advantage in trade, and sent gifts, sacks of grain, casks of wine, the embroidery of Highgarden's ladies. Lady Olenna's letters to Sansa were witty and sly, warning her not to trust any rose that did not show its thorns. From the Vale, Lord Royce sent word that the Eyrie was secure, and the mountain passes watched. Even in Dorne, Prince Doran replied with careful gratitude for the return of Dornish hostages, and a promise of oranges when the harvest came. The seasons turned, and as the air grew heavy with summer heat, news from the north arrived by swift raven. Wildlings had crossed the wall in great numbers, and the Night's Watch had sent a plea for help. "The snows may be gone from King's Landing," Maester Aemon wrote, "but winter walks still in the shadows, and the dead do not sleep." Robb summoned his council at once. Sansa, Sir Brynden, Sir Willis Manderley, Maester Theomore, and even the Dornish envoys attended. In the solar, maps were unrolled, and letters from the wall laid bare for all to see. "The north is our shield," Robb said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "If the watch falls, every city in the realm will feel it. We must send grain, men, and steel." Sir Brynden nodded. "I will go myself, with a column of Riverlanders. The Blackfish has not forgotten the old vows." Sir Willis Manderley pledged White Harbor's fleet to carry supplies as far as Eastwatch. Sansa pressed her hand to Robb's. "Send a letter to every lord and lady who has feasted at this table. Ask them to send what help they can. Remind them that the war is over, but the realm is not yet safe." Then, within a week, the city's mood shifted once again. The talk in the markets was of the wildlings and the Night's Watch. The Black Brothers who had lingered in the capital now marched north with cartloads of bread, salted fish, and new recruits from Flea Bottom. Robb himself rode out to the city gates as the first column departed. Grey Wind at his side, Sansa with the orphans and their flower baskets, the city watching in awed silence. Later that summer, a ship from Pentos arrived in Blackwater Bay. The captain bore news of dragons. "A Targaryen girl has conquered Slaver's Bay. Her armies grow, and her ships sail west. She is called Breaker of Chains, Mother of Dragons." The rumor spread through the court like wildfire, thrilling some, chilling others. Robb called his council again, now larger than ever. A gathering of Riverlanders, Northmen, Reachmen, and even Dorne. The debate was fierce. Some saw in the return of Targaryens the promise of old magic and strength. Others, only the threat of new war. Sansa listened to every word, her face grave. That evening, as the city feasted beneath lanterns strung along the city walls, Robb and Sansa spoke alone on the ramparts, looking out over the red roofs and the sparkling black water. "Do you fear the Dragon Queen?" Robb asked, his voice low. Sansa considered. "I fear anyone who comes with fire and war, but I fear the loss of what we have built more." Robb smiled, pride and sadness in his eyes. "You sound like Mother." Sansa reached for his hand. "I sound like a Stark. We remember." As the moon rose, the bells rang for the city's first summer festival in years. The great Sept's steps were covered in petals, and children paraded through the square in cloaks sewn with direwolves and trout and sunbursts. The bakers sold wolf loaf, the smiths raffled new blades, and the merchants sang songs of peace and plenty. Even as threats gathered beyond the horizon, the Wolf City endured. In the north, the Blackfish and the Night's Watch stood firm. In the east, eyes watched for sails crowned with flame. But in King's Landing, at least for this brief and golden summer, there was hope. Robb Stark stood above it all, Sansa by his side, and felt for the first time that he truly ruled not through fear or hunger, but through the promise that winter's shadow could be lifted, and that even in Westeros, peace might be possible if men and women chose to build it. They watched as the orphans ran through the streets, chasing each other beneath the banners of wolf and trout, and they dared to imagine a new song for a new age, sung not for the glory of kings or the terror of war, but for the hard-won joy of life return. Far to the north, beyond the wall, snow drifted under a sky of stars. But in the heart of the realm, summer's warmth prevailed, and the wolf's reign endured, hopeful and just, against all odds and all the scars the realm still bore. By the third summer of the wolf's reign, The change in King's Landing was no longer just hope and hunger's aftermath, but a living, daily fact. The city hummed in the long daylight with the sounds of industry. Hammers on wood and stone, saws in the forest above the Blackwater, the shouts of tradesmen on the bridge over the river, and the laughter of children at play in every square. The scars of siege and riot were not gone, but now they were countered by painted shutters, new thatch, and the pale green of saplings rising above old ash. Fleabottom's worst alleys became clean. Swept twice a day by orphans who now had beds and lessons, their work rewarded with meat pies and praise. Robb walked among them all, king in the eyes of the law, but neighbor in the hearts of many. He left the crown in a chest in his chambers. He would only wear it for feasts or when ceremony was demanded. The real work was never done beneath a circlet. It was in the sweat of dawn patrols along the riverbank, in sitting through meetings where guildsmen argued over the new fish market's location, in listening to a bricklayer's widow plead for her son's freedom from a cruel old master, in seeing to it that mercy was given even as justice was done. His beard had grown thicker, his voice deeper. In those 3 years he'd changed from the boy king of banners and battles to a man whose strength lay in patience and presence. Grey Wind, older and larger than ever, still followed him everywhere, an unquestioned sentinel who seemed both to guard and encourage the city's young. Sometimes the direwolf would spend an afternoon lying in the shade of the Red Keep's yard as orphans clambered over his back or braided flowers into his mane. No one in the city doubted that peace and order endured only so long as the wolf and his master remained. It was in late summer, when the peaches ripened on the river slopes and the honey harvest began, that news came from the north. A battered black raven brought the seal of the night's watch. The message was brief and ominous. Wildlings crossed the wall in greater numbers than ever before. We have lost contact with 3 keeps. Some say the dead walk again. The watch pleads for aid. Robb called his council that same evening. They met in the solar, lanterns burning. Maps spread wide. Sir Brynden Tully had returned from the wall with 200 Riverlanders, gaunt and weathered, but full of bitter respect for what he had seen there. Sansa sat to Robb's right, her presence now so essential that the lords deferred to her in any matter of city governance. Sir Willis Manderley represented the north, his beard streaked with white, but his voice hearty as a winter feast. Sir Brynden's report was as grim as the letter. The watch holds the wall, but just. The free folk have come not for war, but for refuge. Something drives them. White shadows, cold things in the woods. They call them others, and I saw wounds that would not heal. Eyes like blue glass. I've never feared the cold, but there's a terror in it that sword and fire can't answer. Now, Robb looked around the table. How many men can we send, and how fast? Sir Willis nodded. White Harbor will outfit 3 ships within the week. We'll send grain, timber, axes, and men willing to fight or build. Sansa's voice was soft but decisive. And send healers and letters to every lord and lady from Old Town to the Eyrie. The wall stands for us all, whether the lords remember it or not. Bell. Sir Brynden grunted his approval. We'll need gold, Robb. The watch is poor, and so are the free folk. But they have strong arms and know how to hunt and build. Offer them land south of the wall. Let them settle where the woods are empty and the fields untilled. Robb nodded. And who will lead the men we send north? The council was silent for a moment. Then the Blackfish rose. Let me one last time. I am too old to marry or farm, but I know war in the north. I'll hold the gift and the new settlements until you can send a Stark. Bah. Robb stood and clasped Brynden's hand. Go with my blessing and my thanks. It was not only the north that demanded his attention. In the east, the threat of the Targaryen girl grew with each passing month. More ships arrived in port from the free cities, carrying rumors of dragons, of whole fleets burned at sea, of city gates battered down by sellsword legions, of slavers crucified and children made free. Maester Theomore, now grown respected and sure in his place, laid out the latest tidings. Daenerys Targaryen now rules all of Slaver's Bay. She has made peace with the Dothraki. and her dragons are grown large as riverboats. She sends envoys west, offering trade and friendship, but makes it clear that one day she will come for the Iron Throne. Sansa studied the map. She has no reason to hate us, but she may not forgive what was done to her family by the old kings. We must offer peace, make her see the city is changed. Robb agreed. Write to her, Sansa, in your own hand. Invite her envoys, ask her what she seeks. If she comes with justice, she'll find friends here. If she comes with fire, we'll stand as we have before. Nam. That letter, written in Sansa's delicate script and sealed with both wolf and trout, was sent on the swiftest Lyseni galley. Months would pass before an answer returned, but the city held its breath as rumors grew ever wilder. Some said a dragon had been seen in the dusk over the stepstones, others that the Queen's ships would soon block the narrow sea. The Reach, ever opportunistic, tried to use the Targaryen threat to win better terms in trade and marriage. Mace Tyrell's offers grew more extravagant. Let my daughter wed your king and we will send twice the grain and gold. Sansa declined as she always did, answering each overture with measured courtesy. The city needs friends, not queens. Meanwhile, the city's own fabric knit tighter. A new granary rose on the ruins of the old lion's storehouse, the mason's stone marked with a direwolf and a sheaf of wheat. The children in Sansa's schools began writing histories of the war, some of them retelling tales of the bread riots and the night of fire, others of the day the king ate wolf loaf, with the orphans in flea bottom. The faith renewed the bells, melted from old bronze and cast anew, ringing out every morning for peace and in memory of the fallen. One day, a party of small folk from the Westerlands arrived at the gates, led by a widow whose husband had died in Tywin's last failed sortie. She fell to her knees before Robb, her voice shaking. My lord, we have no bread, no hope, and nowhere to go. Will you let us starve outside your walls? Then shall. Robb knelt beside her. No one will starve, not in my city. You and yours are welcome. There is work for every hand and food for every belly. Only oathbreakers and murderers need fear me. News of the king's mercy traveled back to Casterly Rock. It was not long before envoys from Tywin himself came, bringing uneasy peace terms. Robb met them in the Solar, with Sansa and Brynden Tully at his side. The lead envoy, Lord Lefford, was a gaunt man, his golden hair gone to silver. Lord Stark, Lord Tywin offers his fealty and his hostages in exchange for the restoration of his lands and the safe return of his kin. Robb considered, Tywin Lannister's fealty is worth less than a broken sword, but if he swears it before the gods in the city and opens his storehouses to those still hungry, I will return his kin. If he breaks his word again, he will have no friends left in the realm. Lefford agreed, and a date was set for the ceremony. The great septee was filled with banners of every house that had bled in the wars. Wolf, Trout, Sun, Rose, and even the red and gold of Lannister. Before the eyes of gods and men, Tywin's own cousin knelt and swore peace. It was not the end of old wounds, but it was the start of a new peace. That autumn, a lean harvest was gathered, but it was enough. The city held feasts on the riverbanks, bonfires burning long into the night. Bread and fish and apples, beer and honey cakes and roasted boar, all were shared. Sansa watched from the steps of the septee. Orphans crowded around her and smiled at the sound of laughter and music. In the north, Brynden Tully sent word. We have made peace with the free folk. The wall stands. The dead do not march, though the snows grow early this year. The watch remembers. As the leaves turned and winter crept in, Robb stood at his window in the Solar, Sansa at his side, and watched the city lights flickering in the dark. We did not win this peace by swords alone, he murmured. Sansa leaned against him. No, we won it by sharing bread. Now. Gray wind howled in the yard, a long mournful song, but the city listened and did not fear. The war had starved the lions and broken the realm, but in the peace that followed, the wolf's mercy was the bread that bound the realm together. The first snows fell again before the year's end, light and clean, covering the city in a new hush. This time, King's Landing did not shiver. Fires burned in every hearth, and hope, still fragile, still young, survived the turning of the year, promising that even in Westeros, a better age might just be born. Winter settled again over King's Landing, the snows arriving not as conqueror, but as guest. For the first time in memory, they blanketed a city prepared. Storehouses brimming with grain and salted meat, coppers and silvers in the pockets of even the poorest, candles enough to hold the dark at bay in every alley and tower. The city no longer feared the cold or hunger. Instead, it met the long nights with fires, song, and the steady pulse of life returned. Robb Stark took the first snows as omen and blessing. He stood one dusk atop the highest parapet of the Red Keep. Gray wind at his side, his cloak fur-lined and thick enough to ward off the worst wind. Below, torches traced the line of the walls, and the city glimmered with life, a hearth against winter's chill. To the north, beyond the horizon, lay Winterfell, his heart's home. But he had come to see this battered city of stone and river as a second realm, a charge handed down by fate and won not in battle, but in the hunger and hope of its people. Sansa joined him in silence, the hem of her pale blue gown swept with frost. She watched the city, measuring its quiet with the caution of one who remembered famine and fire. They look to you, Robb. Every lantern, every song, they do not burn or sing unless you will it. He shook his head, lips quirking. No, they do not burn or sing unless you will it, Sansa. You are the breath in their lungs and the word on their tongues. I am only the shield, the hand that holds the line. You are what fills it. She leaned against his arm, their breath mingling in the cold. If this is peace, let us not let it go. Below, the snows fell heavier, cloaking the city in white. Through the heart of winter, King's Landing's days were marked by rhythms that in the old times would have seemed a dream. Each morning the bell of the great sept tolled for bread and mercy, and the baker's oven sent up clouds of warm steam. The orphans of the city, now schooled and fed, walked through Flea Bottom, delivering loaves to the elderly and ill, wearing wolf and trout pins on their cloaks. In the squares, the city guard, half drawn from the commons, half from old houses who had bent the knee to Robb, walked arm in arm with the faith's poor fellows, keeping the peace with laughter and gentle hands. Sansa made it known that any child found hungry would be brought to the keep itself for food and shelter. The old slums saw a miracle of small, everyday kindness. Walls mended, roofs patched, neighbors meeting by candlelight to read the missives Sansa sent to every district with tales of hope and news of the realm. It was not perfect. Nothing in Westeros could be. There were still thieves, still the occasional hungry riot, still lords who grumbled that too much was given to the rabble and not enough to those born to rule. But the balance held. When the city's first frost fair was held on the Blackwater, the whole realm seemed to pause. Docks were transformed by colored lanterns, the riverbank crowded with stalls selling hot-spiced wine, honeyed almonds, and the new snow bread invented by Sansa's bakers, a dense, sweet cake dusted with sugar and nutmeg. Shaped in the likeness of deerwolves and trout, mummers put on a play recounting the siege of bread, and children in gray cloaks sledded down the slopes below the Red Keep. Robb presided in simple leathers, cloak and crown left behind, laughing and sharing ale with blacksmiths and dockworkers. He judged the sled races and awarded the prize for the best carving of gray wind, while the direwolf himself received treats and scritches from 100 children. Sansa moved through the crowds, dispensing praise and gentle correction, her cheeks pink with cold and her hands warm to all who touched them. At the high table, amid the laughter and music, Maester Theomore brought news from the north. The wall still stood, Brynden Tully's settlements in the Gift thrived, and Jon Snow, now Lord Commander, sent thanks for every barrel of wheat and salted pork sent from the south. Wildling's settlements grew stronger, now that Robb's word of amnesty was law across the Crownlands and Riverlands. The others, for now, had not been seen again. The news from the east was more troubling. Daenerys Targaryen's ships had reached Lys and Myre. Her dragons had grown larger, and her council now included both Westerosi exiles and learned men from across the free cities. Yet her envoys, when they arrived in King's Landing, were met with open gates and courtesy. Robb and Sansa both received them in the Solar, over a feast of winter fare. The lead envoy, a sharp-faced woman with silver hair and Valyrian eyes, bowed low. Queen Daenerys sends peace, and asks only what was denied her: blood, recognition, and the right to return. She wishes to see the realm made whole, not sundered. Robb listened, weighing every word. We do not deny her birth or her right, but the city remembers fire and blood as well as famine. If she comes as conqueror, she will find every house in the realm allied against her. If she comes as queen, offering peace and alliance, she will find the realm ready to meet her. The envoy nodded, satisfied. Then let us speak, and perhaps write a new song for the realm. Over the following weeks, envoys from every corner of Westeros and beyond filled the Red Keep. Dorne sent fruit and wine, the Reach barrels of new cider, the Vale tapestries, and even the Iron Islands, chastened by years of isolation, sent pearls and salt cod. The city's markets grew lively with the languages and costumes of many lands. Robb's council expanded to include not just lords, but the guild leaders and wise women Sansa had championed, voices from every quarter. In these gatherings, the Wolf's reign came to mean more than military victory. It became a vision of a realm ruled by law and mercy, one where bread was as prized as gold, and the laughter of children was louder than the tramp of boots or clangor of swords. Spring did not come quickly. The snows lingered, and frost cut through the bones of the city. Yet gardens sprouted beneath Sansa's careful hand in every abandoned lot, and in the God's Wood behind the keep, the first crocus pushed through the ice by the heart tree, its petals white and purple against the red leaves. There were still crises. A merchant's riot when a false rumor spread of the grain running out. A fire that swept through an alley near the fish market. An outbreak of fever in the southern wards. Each time, Robb and Sansa moved together. He among the men with buckets, she in the sick rooms with cool cloths and gentle songs. Their steadiness, more than their banners, kept the city from panic. Letters from the north spoke of new life as well. At Winterfell, Bran Stark's recovery was the talk of the realm. A boy who could not walk, but who had tamed wolves and crows, and who wrote to his siblings of strange dreams and ancient secrets. Arya, still missing, was now believed lost, but Sansa refused to let mourning close her heart. Instead, she ordered her name inscribed in the sept and the old god's heart tree. So every prayer in King's Landing would be for Arya's safe return. As winter waned, Robb turned his eyes to the future. He summoned the lords of every great house to the city for a council, unlike any held since Aegon's time. A council not of war, but of peace and planning. The realm has bled, he wrote, and survived. Now let us build it new. The great lords arrived: Edmure Tully, plumper but shrewder; Lord Wyman Manderly, beaming at the sight of his daughter's daughter born in the keep; the Martells proud and aloof; Lord Royce from the Vale, and even a Tyrell, cautious but eager for alliance. Each brought gifts and grievances. Each sought favor and feared loss. But Robb and Sansa sat them all in the small hall and listened with open hearts. For days the council debated. New roads were planned, new laws for land and inheritance, the appointment of judges and the founding of a university. Ideas Sansa pressed with particular vigor. Dorne lobbied for more independence, the Ironborn for trade rights, the Reach for marriage alliances. There were arguments, even shouting, but no blood spilled. On the final night, after a feast that stretched long into darkness, the lords gathered in the God's Wood beneath lanterns, and the eyes of the old gods and the seven. Each in turn bent the knee, not to a king by conquest, but to the king and queen who had rebuilt the realm. Oaths were sworn, not of fear but of hope. As the new year dawned, the snows melted. The first spring rains fell on King's Landing, and the city, for the first time in memory, did not shrink from them. Instead, people came out to dance and sing in the streets, and children wove garlands for Sansa and Robb from wildflowers and sweet-smelling grass. At the window of the Red Keep, Robb and Sansa watched, side by side. We have given them peace, Sansa said. But can we keep it? Robb took her hand. We will, as long as we remember who we are, and who they are. The bells of the city rang out, clear and joyous, and the story of the wolf's reign, born of starvation, grown through justice, and crowned with hope, became the tale mothers and fathers told their children as they drifted into dreams beneath a new, gentler sky.